G'day guys, Socket here. Today's viewer's question comes from Tank52086 who says, thanks for all your hard work. Could you go over how you choose house curves to match your expectations of how a system should sound? And adjusting the curve with the room adjustments in REW EQ. For example, say you are using the Jazzy curve, but there just isn't enough mid-bass punch for the kick drums. What do you do then? So it's quite a multi-layered question that Tank's asking. I think if I break it down, he wants to know, how I go about choosing house curves to suit my listening preference. And then if you just aren't getting what you expect out of a house curve, how much you go about modifying it to sort of help. And then, of course, there's this question that everybody wants, which is more punch, more kick, more snap, in the bass end, of their tune. How do you go about getting that? Is it related to your house curve, or is it something a little bit more complicated? So I'm going to see if I can dive into each of these topics for you and answer Tank's question as best as I can. Anyway, let's jump in. So we've covered house curves in a fair bit of depth in the house curve tutorial, so I'm not going to cover a lot of that ground again. If you're interested, I will put the link to that tutorial in the description so you can go and check it out. But just really quickly, house curves. So a house curve in car audio, we use it to level match and as a target line for when we're doing EQ work, when we shape the response of our speakers. A typical car audio house curve kind of looks a little bit like this. These are the main features. You have what we call a low frequency rise, where we add a bit more bass to the tune. And the reason for that is if we had this flat, you would have virtually no bass in your tune at all, and therefore we add what we call a low frequency rise, where from 200 or 250 we add bass at 2 or 3 dB per octave to give us more bass in our tune. So this is a typical feature, a low frequency rise. The second feature in most of the tunes is the mid range is generally pretty flat. Sometimes there's a little bit of a scoop out here between 1, 2 or 3,000 hertz to sort of take out some of the shriekiness, for want of a better term, in the vocals. But once again, it's a matter of personal preference. And then the third feature of most of the house curves is this high frequency cut. So a lot of people don't like, they say that the top end is very harsh or fatiguing on their ears, or whatever, and so they like to sort of mellow that out a bit by cutting out some of that high frequency energy, and so you have this high frequency cut, and that could be 1 or 2 or 3 dB. So in most of the tutorials you would have seen that I've been using this very simple house curve. It's flat from 20,000 all the way to where the low frequency rise begins, which is usually around this 200 or 250 mark. And so I've been using that house curve just to keep things super simple. But there's a lot of different house curves around, and well-known ones like the Crutchfield. So here's the low frequency rise, from 250 going up to 100, and then kind of flattening out. So there's a bit of bass being added there, and a few bumpy bits going on here, and then here's this high frequency cut, starting quite late at around about 12,000. But so there are those three features: a rise, a flat area, and then a cut. If we have a look quickly at another one, such as the Harman, we've got this rise, this cut, and this sort of flat area, but it's it's a much more gradual progression. So and there's a whole bunch of others: the the JL, the Whitledge, and the one that Tank was referring to, which is called the Jazzy. And in the Jazzy, you can see it's got this scoop out between, it looks about 1600 hertz and 5000, where it's got a bit of a 3 dB scoop out. But what do these what do these shapes actually mean when you're listening to your house curves? Which one is the best? And the answer to that is there really isn't a best house curve. It really depends on your own personal preferences. If you like a lot of bass, then clearly you'll want a house curve, or to create a house curve with a very high, lot more bass at this end. And you can certainly start that bass rise a little bit earlier or a little bit later. If you don't like a lot of detail, or it's a bit fatiguing at the top end, and certainly put a cut. You're looking for a cut here, that could be 1, 2, 3 dBs. If you wanted to cut a bit early, then you could move the knee down to this point at 2K. Some people actually, I prefer to keep this area flat. That's my own personal preference. I think cutting it takes a lot of the top end detail out, so I tend to leave mine flat. And there are some people who like the extra sparkle, so they will add, instead of doing a cut, they'll actually add a rise to the low end here. So yeah, it really just depends on what you enjoy in your music, as to how you can shape this house curve to meet your own personal preferences. So once you've got a house curve that you like, how do you go about customizing or modifying it to meet your own personal needs? Well, there's several ways of doing it, and the first one we're going to have a look at is one we covered during the tutorial. It's the Jazzy's Tuning Companion. So the Jazzy Tuning Companion has been around for years. It's a simple little tool for creating house curves and target curves for your speakers. It does everything that I needed to do, but it's certainly not the only tool that's available. If you use something else and it works really well, please put it in the comments below. I'm sure Tank would love some other options. But really quickly, this is the way the Jazzy Tuning Companion works. Down here next to house curves, you can click on one of these and, for example, click on the JBL house curve, and what it will do is give you the overarching house curve plus the target curves for each of your speakers. You can change the crossovers of your speakers and the slopes of your speakers if you want to match whatever it is that you want to that you're trying to create. And when you're ready, you just click on Export Text Files, and it will drop all of the different curves into the folder of your choice. So that is certainly one way to play around, and there are 3 or 4 quite common or standard house curves available, for such example the half Whitledge. If you like a lot of bass, the Whitledge is probably the one to chase or to try to use, but the one that Tank was talking about is the Jazzy with its scoop out around about the 2000 hertz mark. Now the other thing that the Jazzy Tuning Companion has is this custom mode, where you can enter your different values for your sound pressure levels against the frequencies, and so for example add 6 dB at 800, right, and then once you've finished playing around with that, you can export the files and then import them into REW, or grab and drop them into REW and start using them. So now I've created a little custom file, so I'll just show you how it looks. Okay, so here is the custom file that I created, and it is basically the standard house curve that I showed you at the beginning of this video, with its high frequency cut and its low frequency rise and this flat part in the middle. And I can change all of these numbers to match the curve that we're doing in the tutorial, and then and so you can see here I've put in 18 decibels at 20 hertz and 40 hertz it's 13.3, which has allowed me to get this this line, but you can literally put any number you like in here at all. So once we're ready, we click on Export Text Files, and then we can grab them and drop them into REW, and I'll show you how to do just that. Okay, so here are all the Jazzy files that we've just created from that custom tune. That custom house curve. So you can see it has the overall curve, and then one for mid bass, one for the mids, one for the subs, and one for the tweeters. You can literally just grab all of them together and then throw them into REW, and if we just bring up all SPL, and blow that up, you can see the overall house curve, the tweeter, the mid bass, and the sub all ready to go. And as I said, that's just using the custom house curve tool in Jazzy. So that's certainly one way of customizing or creating custom house curves. The second way I would like to show you is how to do it using a REW text file. Okay, so let's say that I have found a house curve that I really like. In this case, it's the Jazzy house curve, but I want to make some changes to it. How do I go about doing that? Well, another option is to use convert this into a text file and make changes to the text file and then import it back into REW. So, for example, the way you would do that is make sure that the house curve that you want to change is selected, so it's white and all the others are grayed out. Then you go to File, Export Measure as Text. You'll get this pop up, and then you click OK, and then you can save it as well, let's call it New Jazzy House Curve, right? We can do something like that, and then we can go and find the file, New Jazzy House Curve. There it is, and when we open it, you can see it has all the frequencies on one side, and then the boost or cut on the other side. And you can literally go into, for example, I want to go into frequency 100, right? And I'm going to change that not from 2.1, I'm going to make that 4.77, right? And this one's going to be 4.67, and this one's going to be 4.98. Okay, and then you can save it, and then you can drag the new copy back into REW, and then you've got your own modified version of the Jazzy house curve. Very clunky way of doing it, but certainly another method for customizing existing house curves. Alright, now another way of doing it is to actually use the REW EQ tool. So let's continue working with the Jazzy house curve. So what I'm going to do is open up the EQ tool, and we have the Jazzy house curve way down here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to load up a copy of the Jazzy house curve, right? So there it is there. So I'm going to open that up, and that has now dropped a copy way up here. All right, because our target level is set as 55, and it's way up there. And here is the original Jazzy house curve. Now, if I drop this back to 0, you will see that the two do not match, and the reason that they don't is because the Jazzy house curve is being influenced by this adding room curve numbers, right? This low frequency bass and this high frequency cut that we've looked at before. But if I turn that off, you'll notice the two lines completely line up now, right? The original Jazzy and the one I just imported are now on top of each other, right? Because I've turned this room curve off. All right, so now that I have a Jazzy, the house curve I want to play around with, into REW, I can actually turn this top target type off to turn that to none so it doesn't interfere. And then I can do a couple of things. I can go, well, I don't want my target curve to be down at 0. I'm going to be doing all of my work at 60 dB, because that's where my tune is and that's where my target line is going to be. So I'm going to change this to 60, right? So straight away it puts, instead of being way down here where most house curves are, it's now on your target line, and it's going to be much more useful for you when you're doing your tunes. The second thing we can do is we can play around with the high frequency cut or the low frequency rise, and we can do that by turning on the house curve. Now, if I don't want a high frequency rise, a low frequency rise, I can change this to 0. And I can change this one to 0, so I'd have the same amount of rise as in the original Jazzy curve and the same amount of cut as the original Jazzy curve, right? But I might want to say, well, no, I'm going to add a little bit more rise. I want more bass on my Jazzy curve than I have, so I'm going to add 1 dB to that. Or no, I'm going to make it 1.5, right? And then, and I do want a little bit of a cut at the other end. I'm going to cut half a dB off, right? I want it to be a little less shouty. And you know what? I'm going to change this. I want my rise to start a little bit later, so I'm going to make it 350. Okay, I can move it back to there. And so using these, using these different buttons, I can shape this curve and start these cuts and rises where I like. Okay, so once I'm finished playing around with it, I can then just generate measurement from target shape, and that will put a copy down here in REW. Now the reason we can't see it is because it's way up here, right? It's way up here. But if we line these two up, and let's just see if we can do that. Align SPL. Try that. There we go. You will see that the blue line is the original Jazzy. The purple line is the Jazzy that we manipulated. And so we've got a slight little cut of half a dB, and we've got a rise that's not starting at 200 any longer, but starting at 350, and we've added a lot more bass. So to answer one of Tank's questions, how do I go about changing the Jazzy house curve to suit my own needs? Well, that's certainly one way that you can approach it. But there is a second way. So once again, we'll use the Jazzy house curve as an example. We can go up into the EQ tool again. Let's open that up. But instead of using the house curve to manipulate the shape, this time we're going to use EQ filters, which is down here in the filter task section. So we don't really need this top section anymore. We can get rid of the house curve by clicking the red cross, and we can turn off this target line. And that just leaves us with the original measurement and the predicted measurement. So as we make changes with the EQ filter, we're going to see the changes in the predicted line. So let's open up the EQ filters, and here are all the filters, and you can use the pull downs, and there is a whole bunch of them. There is the parametric EQ filter, or the PK filter, and so for example we can grab that, and let's say I want some extra boost around about the 150 mark, so I'm going to change that to 150, and I'm going to use a Q of 1, so it's quite broad, and I'm going to add 3 dB, and you can see that now I've got a bit of extra boost around that 150 mark, and I go, you know what, I think I also want to sort of increase the punch of my mid bass or my sub, sorry, around about the 80 mark. So I'm going to use a PK filter at 80 Hertz, and I'm going to add 4 dB there. You don't want to have a very high Q because you get a big spike like this, but I'm going to add a flatness target of 2 and lift that all the way up there. Or maybe that's too steep. Maybe I just want to keep it at a 1. And then sort of bring this down a little bit because it's just too much over here now. So you can by playing around with the frequencies, you can shape this bass end, or you can make this area less steep. So for example, I can use a PK filter here at 2920, and I'm going to increase that. Try to get rid of that dip completely. And add a 1 to it, and maybe that's a bit too much. But you get the idea. You can play around with this all day and shape the curves that you want. And when you've got it the way you like, you go down to filter tasks, and you can use this button down here that says generate measurement from predicted, and when you click that, it will drop a copy of that down here, and this will be your new Jazzy modded house curve, right? And you can turn that other one off, and there you are. There's the Jazzy house curve with your new changes locked into it. Once again, you can export it as a text file. Okay, export text as measurement, and then you can save it somewhere as your own new house curve. All right, so that is certainly 3 or 4 different ways of manipulating existing house curves or creating custom house curves, and that's all fine. But what about if you have a house curve and you want to create your own custom speaker target curves? Well, let me show you how to do that. Okay, to demonstrate how we're going to create our custom speaker target curves, I'm going to just open up this random house curve that I've made that I've called Rando House Curve, right? It's pretty wild, it's got bumps, dips everywhere, but let me show you how we can match these crazy curves using the REW EQ tool. So first of all, what we're going to want to do is we just want to make a copy of this house curve so that we have an original and we're not going to sort of muck it up. So just select it over here, make sure you are in all SPL, then click on Actions, Measurement Actions, and then click Response Copy, and that will make an exact copy of the house curve, so you can now play around with it, right? So what we're going to do is go into EQ, and the first thing we want to do is we want to load up a copy of the house curve. So wherever you have it saved, just go and grab it and open it up. And just like before, it's going to add a copy of the house curve above the original. So if we now turn off this full range speaker thing, we don't need that at the top. And we turn this to 0 and have this grayed out, you will notice that the two lines perfectly match, which is exactly what we just want to check, that the original and the house curve that we've loaded in are the same. So we turn that off, we untick room curve, and we type in 0 here, and the two should overlap. If they don't and they're sort of a little bit apart for some reason like this, something like that, it just means that your house curve is not set on 0, but just get them to line up so you can check that they're exactly the same. Now, once we've done that, the first thing we're going to want to do is set the house curve at the target level that you're going to be doing your EQ work, and we've covered this in the tutorial, so let's pretend that we've got a target level of 60. Okay, so now the curve is at the target level that we want to work on, and now what we want to do is we want to add our room curve. So in other words, we want to now activate this, and this is where we can add onto our house curve the low frequency rise, and in this case we're going to make it let's make it 250 with a rise of 3, no cut, and a target level of 60. Okay, so let's leave it like that. Now what's happened is the house curve is having this 253 dB low frequency rise applied to the actual house curve. So if I turn this back to 0 again, you will see that it's different now, right? It's got that 3 dB rise built into it. Okay, so let's put it back to 60 because that's where we want to work. Now we've got our house curve with the added low frequency rise built into it. We can now generate measurement from target shape, and now we have a copy of the house curve that we are going to use with our 3 dB rise, and we're going to use for our tune. So this will be Rando house curve start, right? No, I won't call it that. I will call it overall, because that's now the house curve that we're going to use going forward, right? So I can literally get rid of these other copies, right? That's fine now. And now what I want to do is make up 4 copies of this house curve. So we're going to select it, we're going to go into Actions, Measurement Actions, and I'm going to click 1 for tweeters, 1 for mids, 1 for mid bass, and 1 for subs. Alright, and now I can just call them tweeters, mids, mid bass, and subs. So we're going to now use these copies to create the actual speaker target curve. So with tweeters, we're going to go up into EQ, We can open that up. We've got our room curve. We're going to change the target to 60. Okay. This needs to be 250, and now the two lines should match. Yes, they do. That's great. So what we're going to do is change this, because we're doing a tweeter. We're going to use a bass limited speaker. We put in the crossover for it, and I think we're going to use 3000. That's fine, and a 24 dB slope. And you can see that the automatically REW creates a target curve that's following the house curve that we have in the system, and there we have our tweeter target curve. So we can just click down here on generate measurement from target shape, and here we have our tweeter house curve. Wow, now that is way up here on the scale because we've moved everything up to 60. So, and there is our first speaker target curve. Now let's move on to the mids. We do exactly the same thing. We change all of our settings to where we want them to be, so they need to be consistent, just like when we're creating house curves. So our mids are ready to go. We go to speaker driver. We put in the crossovers that we want, so let's make that, for example, 200 to 3000 with Liquid Riley 24 dB slopes. And there we have it. We now have our mid target curve. Generate measurement from target, and change the name to mid target curve. Great, so now we have our tweeter and our mid, and when we sum these up, they should follow that that line there, right? So far so good. Time to do the mid bass. We go EQ. We set all of this our standard settings, so 60, 250, 20, 3000 and 0. Once again, we want to use a speaker driver because we have two curves. I think we set this before to 200, and we're going to cross the sub at 60. Okay. And you'll notice it's a little bit out here. It's not quite matching the line, and that's, that's okay. We'll just click it up a little bit till it touches. It matches like that. Okay, 61.5. And then now we're ready to go. We can just generate measurement from target shape, and it should, there we go, drop it in. Once again, once we sum these two up, it should follow, this line pretty closely. And then finally, we can change that to mid-bass target curve, and then finally we can do the sub. So EQ 250, 23, make that 60. We are using a subwoofer. We want this to be 60 from memory. Yep, that's correct. This one we can just leave as 10. That's fine. And we can just go generate measurement from target, and there you have it. We have our sub target curve as well. So now we have all of our target curves and individual speaker curves for this crazy looking house curve. So if you can create it for this crazy looking thing, you can create it for whatever custom house curve that you have created. Excellent. So now that we've talked about house curves and how to customize them and modify them, you've probably got enough tools in your armory now to go out and create some custom house curves and come up with something that's going to better suit your own listening preferences. But there is one last topic I'd like to touch on that came up in Tank's questions, and that is the question of how do I get more kick and punch out of my mid bass and my subs. Unfortunately, mate, it's not really to do with the house curves. There are things you can do to help improve your bass, but that tight snap and that punch in your chest that you get, that everybody wants from their bass, is largely 70-80% of it comes from the type of speaker that you've selected, how controlled it is, how the speaker is installed. It needs to be super solidly mounted so that there's no flex and things in the speaker mounting. It's to do with the tracks that you're selecting, how the whole system is tuned, how your bass is playing with the mids and tweets, because surprisingly a lot of that impact comes from the higher frequencies, not necessarily from the lower frequencies. So it's a very complex topic and probably worthy of its own video, to be honest. But there are certainly things that you can do with your house curve to improve bass, and some of those things are so that 60 to 80 range is that bump, that thumping, bass thumping sort of frequency range. You can put a few extra decibels into that area and see if that helps. I haven't tried this, but I've been told that raising the low pass crossover, so instead of crossing the sub at like 70, maybe crossing it at 100 or 120 can sometimes sort of help give you more impact, and certainly just making sure your whole system is really well tuned and everything is really time aligned properly will certainly help with the impact of your bass or the volume of your bass, particularly when your mid bass and your subs are properly time aligned and phase aligned. They play completely differently when they're not properly timed. So Tank, I hope that has answered your questions that you asked in the comments earlier. Once again, I hope that was helpful. If you've still got questions, please pop them down in the comments. Otherwise, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.